Cool. Okay, so for the record, this is a CUUPS sanctioned meeting through the Universalist Unitarian Church for Paganism 101. And what is CUUPS? I just want to talk about that a little bit. Is anybody unfamiliar with the church? By show of hands. Okay. So the Universalist Unitarian Church, I'm not going to try to speak about it at length, but just kind of the short version is it's a very inclusive church that accepts a very wide range of spiritualities or no spirituality at all. It kind of comes together around humanistic concepts and sees every religion as equal. That's why they allow pagans to operate on their premises and within their church. That group is called CUUPS, which is the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans. Okay, and that's what we are in this room. The officers that you heard speak, they're the governing body of that, and then we interact with the church using their space, using their outside space. We have a labyrinth down here on the property to hold various holidays and Sabbaths and rituals and things like that, and we'll get into that as we go. But that is, in a nutshell, what the church is. Just a couple of church specifics. So we do our best to make it an inclusive environment for everyone. Okay, so pronouns are a thing here. So it's okay if you mess up, slip up, but we try to use as many gender neutral pronouns as we can and make sure that if just work that out politely and nicely. Okay. Also, another thing that the church does that I'm really a huge fan of, and it ties directly into paganism and the concept of spirits of place. I know you guys probably don't know what that is, a lot of you, but we'll get into it later on, is we always recognize that we're on the indigenous land of the Iowa people, the Sac people, and the Fox people. Okay, so it's very important to understand what the soil contains underneath you, spiritually, energetically, subconsciously. Okay, so I just want to always say that before I begin anything. All right. Next thing is paganism at a glance. I would like to just kind of give you a general idea of what paganism is and kind of some complications with that. Okay, I believe Isa. I always mispronounce your name.
That's right.
That's right. Okay.
Got it.
Did a sermon with Gwen, their partner for church, and they gave a great synopsis. Yeah, the most general thing that you can say about paganism is that it's a religion that is not Abrahamic or Islamic in nature. Okay, so that would be not Jewish, not Muslim, and not Christian. Okay, now there's an issue with that. That is the best and most broadest definition we have. However, it's really not inclusive. If I were to go over and ask a Hindu if they're pagan, they probably wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Same thing if I went to a indigenous African person and said, hey, you're a pagan because you fall into those criteria I just mentioned, they're going to look at me sideways because they don't even really know what that is. Okay. Second issue with that kind of broader definition is that paganism is kind of a reclaimed term. What I mean by that specifically is that pagan is an insult. So when it was created as a word to mean a rural, stupid person who practices primitive things. And then, of course, history is written by the winners, right? So every time the conquerors come in, they get to write the books, and then we became known as pagan. Okay. Some folks are completely okay with that. Some folks who we're going to talk about in depth a little bit later, heathens, they go even further. They say, I'm going to reclaim that term as well. Okay. A heathen is a person who follows the Norse mythology. We'll get into that in a little bit more in depth. But that's the same thing. A heathen is a person a person does things, and again, originally designed to take away from that. You go up to a person conversation they identify as. Third, here we had I think that's up here. Giant pagan I talk about. So to what is a pagan, which is a text there. And I just went over a lot of this stuff, so I'm not going to reiterate it. Paganism, however, does have some core texts, okay? Reverence for nature. Every person that identifies themselves as pagan, by and large, would say that they have a reverence for nature that is kind of unparalleled, okay? Specifically, worship and/or hyper attention to the natural world and the process and its processes. Content of deity or source are best through nature. So basically, it's seen that whatever you communicate with, whether that's gods, goddesses, ancestors, your own subconscious, a general concept of source, all of those things need nature to communicate with. Kind of second of what I call the big three is the concept of blessedness. Okay, does anybody know what the concept of original sin is? Okay, so basically this is the opposite of original sin. Okay, Abrahamic phase pretty much by and large believe all human beings are sinners, dirty, evil, that sort of thing. Blessedness is the belief that nature is not flawed, but rather all parts of it are blessed and are exactly how they need to be. Okay, so there's really no such thing as an inherently evil person or thing. People can be evil in certain situations, but there's not really that concept of you're starting behind the ball and have to be forgiven for anything. And then kind of last of the big three is interconnectedness. Okay, this is a belief that every part of the universe is profoundly connected in some way. And this allows for magical theory and practice. So it's not a requirement to practice magic as a pagan at all. However, I think all folks share the framework of how it could happen if they were to practice. Okay, think of it as like a giant spider web. If you pluck on one string, the entire thing rattles and rattles dew off of it, falls to the ground. That sort of thing. Also, it can alert you to the spider, or the spider knows it's in your web. Okay, so I put that part in so you know that it's not always fun and games. Next little section we have here is entitled Paganism is Personal. So that goes back to defining paganism under the pagan umbrella is difficult because there are really as many different forms of paganism as there are pagans. Okay, I guarantee you that if I were to find another Wiccan, okay, which is sort of one of the older forms of neo-paganism, no two Wiccans, if I separate them up, are going to describe their practice the exact same way, even if they're very devout, they've all read all of the books, they know all of the liturgy, it's all going to be a little bit different. Okay.
Is that because they choose what they want it to be for them?
Partly, yes. And then the other thing I think is just human nature. So
Okay.
I would break that down. If you ask two Catholics to draw you a picture of God, I don't think that they would draw the exact same picture.
For sure.
Right. Pagan source material is also very personal. So it could come from many sources such as articles, the internet, books, history, ancient religious practices, astrology, mathematics, art, paleontology, sorry. Music, poetry, movies, television, folk legends, research into mysterious and unexplained phenomena. The list goes on and on. Kind of a vocabulary term, and I call this hey, isn't this a little crazy? This is the answer to that question, okay? There's a term called unverified personal gnosis. And I know that's a big mouthful, so I'm going to break that down for you, all right? So, I'm sorry, unverified, not universal. Universal would be the opposite. So, when something's unverified, that means that you believe it, you're sure it's true, but you can't scientifically verify it to another person, okay, no matter what you do. Personal means that it was a message or something that you experienced that came to you, and gnosis means knowledge, okay? So gnosis is the idea that even though it is personal and unexplainable, it's still important, all right? It's important to your practice. You'll want to jot that down. You'll want to work with that because that was meant for you, right? other side of that is, and you will see this as you get deeper into the pagan community, it's just like any other religion with subsects and different churches and different covens. Everyone believes they're right. So you'll see people grouping up and trying, which is natural, and it's kind of like study groups, in my opinion. You can figure things out that way. However, you always have to realize that you're probably wrong. Okay. And I mean probably wrong on the broader sense, meaning that that thing was personal to you. Doesn't mean you're wrong, but on the bigger level as applied to society, the world, you're going to need to put it in a new framework. Does that make sense? I know that's a lot, and that's probably the biggest concept philosophically we're going to tackle today. Does that make sense to everyone, or does anybody have any questions about it? Okay. And that big bold thing, I'm not going to read it because I just said it. Okay, so social and legal characteristics of paganism. This is kind of where we go to more by the books, what it is legally, and that sort of thing. Pagan traditions meet the criteria for religion as applied by the U.S. court system. Characteristics that the courts look for specifically are having a historic longevity, a number of devotees, existence of clergy, religious literature, ceremonies, and holidays. Thus, pagans enjoy the same freedoms as everyone else does, here in America at least, or they're supposed to. The federal courts recognize Wicca, the largest pagan tradition, as a religion in the case of Demeter versus Landon in 1986. So pretty recent, right? In this case, the court found that Wicca exhibits all of the characteristics I listed above and is in fact a religion. Part of this was allow pagans to be in the military, to identify as pagans in the military, and to identify national headstones and things like that with pagan symbology. So Pinnacle, I do these for a living, so I'm trying to remember what they all are, but I can't. So yeah. Pagans in the military are allowed to practice religion on military bases. Pagans in the military have chaplains dedicated to serving their religious needs, or more specifically, a chaplain who serves a lot of different religious needs, but is knowledgeable about pagan things as well. Sociologically, paganism meets the following requirements. This will be like through guys like Emil Durkheim. If you've ever taken a sociology class, this is sort of that definition. Parts of that are it has pronounced religious individualism. It says, hey, I'm different. It emphasizes the experience instead of belief and doctrine. It has practical perspectives on matters of authority and practice. It has acceptance and tolerance of other religions and worldviews in general. It has a holistic worldview and is open and flexible in its organizational framework. Okay. Generally speaking, and this does vary, but most pagans don't have a central hierarchy or dogma. All right. Exceptions to this would be Wicca. They generally do. However, Wicca is very fractured. Okay, so back in the 70s, there was one Wiccan community started in England. We'll get to this later. Now there are many. Okay, so I wouldn't even say they are that central anymore. So this is a word of warning, one of my little soapboxes, why I'm glad you're all here, especially new people. Some pagan paths have a specific ethnic focus, okay? Examples of this would be Asatru, which is a type of heathenry, although they don't really identify that way. But yeah, that's very prevalent in there. African and Celtic traditionalists also believe in ethnocentrism, okay? So unfortunately, most pagans are amazing, accepting, wonderful human beings, but wherever there is light, there is also shadow. And there are also right-wing pagans. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but I'm saying that there are violent groups, there are groups that use imagery and things like that from pagan religions to further their own racist or violent activities. you're going to hear the term focused if you hang around in this community very long. This is the idea that your magical practice, your power, is connected to your specific bloodline and thus your specific race. So examples of this would be specific sets of Norse. It's the most common with Norse paganism. Wotanism is kind of the biggest one. It's in the prison systems. If you guys remember the was it Charlottesville riots? Yeah, where that lady was killed by a white supremacist. It was a tiki torch dudes. If you remember that, there's a lot of pagan stuff there. Okay, they use the symbology. They try to build their own religions. Most of it's not that accurate. Most of it is not even really a religion. Really what it's used for is so they can have a white religion in prison so the guards can't bother them. Okay. I was a prison guard for a little bit too, so I have this firsthand. Now, I can't just blame the white guy, okay? This is prevalent in African cultures as well, especially indigenous African cultures. I would say the difference there is that a lot of these are closed practices that are similar to like Native Americans, or their secrets were never meant to be discovered, okay? Thus, is it racist? Probably, but should we have been messing around in their business to begin with? Probably not, okay? So I'm going to table that discussion where it is, but it's just something I want to put on the table because as you folks go into it, they're sweet talkers, man, and they're very rational. So then all of a sudden you might be at a cookout where you are the, let's say that there won't be much color there. Does that make sense? Okay. Enough of that stuff. Yeah. All right, guys, let's talk about the paganism umbrella a little bit. This is getting into specifics about different forms of paganism, different wells that people draw their water from. All right. Just remember that this is by no means an exclusive list or an inclusive list. There's many more. This also focuses on the West. Okay. Hinduism, Shinto, kind of the East. Again, they wouldn't identify themselves as pagans most of the time, so I'm not going to try to identify them as that. All right. We're going to talk first about Religio Romana. Okay, this was the Roman idea of paganism, following a polytheistic view of many gods, borrowed heavily from the Greeks. The word religio has a unique and specialized meaning. It actually means to bind. Okay, it's kind of a fun fact for anything outside of paganism as well. The biggest thing that a religion does is that it binds people together. Because they're very similar, I'm just going to skip to Hellenism. Okay, Hellenism is Greek paganism. All right. So again, most of the time it is polytheistic. You're looking at gods like Zeus and Hera and Hades and Demeter, to name a few. Okay. Skip down to Cometicism. Cometicism is a neo-revival of ancient Egyptian practices. All right. I'm kind of fascinated with this one just because, as I said, I'm an embalmer, and an embalming started in Egypt. So we study it pretty heavily and kind of see why things were done that way. Again, this is a newer thing that started in the 1970s. They would follow gods such as Mot, Bast, Anubis, Thoth, among other, I guess Thoth actually. Druidry, sometimes known as Druidism, is a modern spiritual religion based off of harmony, connection, and reverence for nature. It's commonly extended to include respect for all beings, including the environment itself. The core principle of Druidry is respect for and veneration of nature, and as such, it often involves participation in environmental movement, Another prominent belief is that modern Druids hold is the veneration of ancestors, particularly those that belong to prehistoric societies. Break that down for you a little bit. So Druids kind of come from the Celtic regions, the Ireland and that area around there. The Druids were an ancient class of people. They were basically very natural priests that were there before the Christians and Muslims came in. What we know about them is documented through the records of the Crusaders. So there's not very much for one, and what we do have is probably very skewed. Okay, this gives me a good segue to talk about Reconstructionism. Okay, so generally, when you're practicing as a pagan, there's two ways that you'll do that. One is kind of through a general eclectic process and a symbolic process, where you are saying, what feels best to me? It's very kind of symbolic in the way that you do things. So your rituals don't have to be exactly accurate to the old ways, okay? It's the belief that you get to the point through similar yet different methods. Now, Reconstructionism, on the other hand, are folks that try to reconstruct exactly what the elders did in prehistory. All right, so they are going to go exactly by the book every time. Problem is, as I was just talking about, is that a lot of times there isn't much to go on, and what we do have was either intentionally or unintentionally skewed by the writers of the people putting it down. Okay. So, and this is an opinion, okay? I want to make sure that I state that. But my opinion is that it's very difficult to reconstruct something when you don't have all the pieces. So take what you do have, but try to be as symbolic as possible as well. It's less of a headache, by the way. Heathenry and Ossifru, I already talked about a little bit, not exactly at length, but this is the worship of the Norse pantheon, Thor, Odin, Hel. Also, I'm going to, at this point, throw out a little bit of a trigger warning. One of the things we're going to do later on today is I'm going to take a look at a heathen funeral that I completed for a family. I have express permission from the family to do so. I'm going to take pictures, or I'm going to show you pictures of what we did. It was for a 1-year-old boy. So if you think that would be too difficult for you, you don't see him like in a casket or anything like that, but there are pictures of him from his family and things of that nature. So just a little bit of a warning there. Let's skip down to Wicca. It's the most prominent. It's a modern religion developed in England during the first half of the 20th century. It was introduced into the public in 1954 by Gerald Gardner, a retired British civil servant. At this point, it has no central authority figure. Its traditional core beliefs and principles and practices were originally outlined in the 1940s and 50s by Gardner and Doreen Valente, both in published books. They both published books in secret. They actually published them as fiction. Reason for this is you could still be jailed or even in some cases even killed for being a witch at that point in England.
Burned at the stake.
At that point, I think they were beyond that, but yeah, yeah. Traditional witchcraft, some specific forms of traditional witchcraft are the fairy tradition, Cochrane's craft, the sabbatic craft. Typically, these groups reject any relation to Gardnerianism or Wicca. They claim to be older. So they say, yeah, I know Gardner claimed to have a connection to the old ones, but we really have the collection of the old ones, that's been passed down through our family in secret for generations. I'm not going to speak on the validity of those. That might be completely true. It might not be true. Although typically united in a shared aesthetic rooted in the European folklore, the tradition of the craft contains within it ranks in a rich and varied array of occult groups. From those who follow a contemporary pagan path that is suspiciously similar to Wicca, and those who adhere to Luciferianism. So that's a big, long paragraph saying that even though they're different, they're very similar to Wiccans. They just kind of claim different sources. Okay. Eclectic paganism, we heard that word over here. So what eclectic paganism is kind of that symbolic form that I was talking about. It's the idea of sort of gathering from a lot of different things, all right? And this is so varied on their practice. And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but ma'am, would you be willing to share kind of a little bit from your practice, just sort of a couple things that,
Sure.
yeah, and again, if you guys don't want to answer questions, please don't feel obligated to do so, okay?
So I grew up in the Catholic Church, and there's a lot of ritual to the Catholic Church, which is one of the things that I recognized in the pagan practice as well. And so the holidays, I know you've got Daniel talk about like the Wheel of the Year. I have celebrations for those, private celebrations. I have my own little altar. It isn't dedicated to anyone in particular. I have candles that I burn. Sometimes of the year there are things that I bake specifically or give away to people. They mean something to me. The people I give them to may not necessarily know what that meaning is. But I've taken a little bit of the rituals that I grew up with, seeing in Catholicism all the time, but more around the tradition and the history, I would say, from paganism and the spirituality there.
So I'm going to kind of summarize what you said to sort of define what I was talking about,
Yeah.
okay? So the idea of throwing a bunch of different things in the same pot, a lot of these terms we're going to get to as we go further throughout the course. But you got kitchen witching, right? Kitchen witching is the idea of doing magic in the kitchen through food and through those processes, right? It's like the original chemistry. You have candle magic, okay? So this is the idea of using candles to do your bidding, do your will, to mark certain things. I'm even going to throw in a little bit of Christo-paganism, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, kind of keeping the same format and things like that from Christian ritual. And I'm going to stop there. But you see how that's a bunch of different things thrown in symbolically to suit one person's needs. Good way to say that?
Yep.
Okay. And then a solitary practitioner, also been thrown around too. That's basically defined as someone who practices by themselves. There's this idea of being still in the broom closet, which this person just came out of, right? So that's the idea. Oh, and two, actually, there's two.
That's exact phrase.
Yeah. So, so that's the idea of either by choice or by necessity practicing in private, is all that means. And then Christo-paganism, we just talked about that. That's blending ideas of Judeo-Christian beliefs with pagan beliefs. This is the hardest one for folks to swallow. It's so hard to fathom that people could be pagans and Christian at the same time. But this occurred throughout history. The biggest part would be like where you would have Christians overtaking pagan territories. So has anybody seen Vikings, the show?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then you get this weird, strange bedfellow of the blending of the two religions. Okay. And that's where that kind of comes from classically. Nowadays, we kind of do it by choice. Or some folks just say, you know, hey, I'm going to use Christ as part of my pantheon, or Noah, or whoever.
Sort of like sometimes the pagans, they turn into saints, like Saint Bridget,
Yep.
Saint. So
Yep.
because of the pagan, they had this god or goddess, but the Christians, in order to make the pagans be part of the Christians, said, okay, we're going to turn her into a saint, and therefore, so if you worship her, she is part of Christian, but the pagans go, but she was mine before it was yours. So I mean, that's a way for the pagans to kind of, or for the Christians to kind of help pagans become Christians, quote unquote.
Yep. And also a way for pagans to practice in sort of a disguised fashion as well.
Which is what voodoo sort of was the, down in New Orleans in the Caribbean, they would take the Catholic tradition and blend it in with their African traditions and, hey, yeah, we're worshiping St. Michael, but it's actually our eldest creator God, and nobody knew the difference because, hey, you're worshiping one of our saints, and they're sitting here going, no, we're not, you don't realize it.
Exactly. All right, guys, that kind of concludes that section. Anybody have anything on that they'd like to discuss real quick? Okay. So next we're going to go down to the theisms.
I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Perhaps I'm getting ahead of you, does CUUPS kind of lean towards one or another of the
Not
different
particularly. I would say it's a loosely based Wiccan framework for ritual, kind of.
We call ourselves Pagan Light.
Yeah.
Pagan
So-
lit?
Pagan Light.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
it.
If I may,
Like it.
when we redid our bylaws recently, we explicitly referred to basically ourselves as advocates of earth-centered spirituality, to include everything like Wicca, witchcraft, but also just things like pantheism, monotheism, which you see he's going to get into, duotheism and panentheism and all those other things, just all the above kind of earth-focused. And CUUPS is an extension of the UU, so it's not going to be explicitly one or the other. It's going to be very heavily between chapter to chapter, what traditions they follow.
Gwen's our ritual officer,
Hi, Gwen.
Hi.
and also my wife.
So, hi.
Thank you.
That was very well put. Basically, that surmises everything we're going to talk about right now. But we're just going to kind of go through the different ways to view source. Now, that term source talks about however you see whatever you're getting the messages from. That's how I define it. Okay. Monotheism. I don't think I've ever rightly met a monotheistic pagan, but they could certainly exist. Monotheism is the belief in one God. So this is generally the belief that God created all of reality. God is totally self-sufficient, and it's exclusive. It denies that other gods exist from other faiths. Examples would be Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Sikhism. And we kind of go to the opposite of that, polytheism. Okay, there are a lot of polytheistic pagans. This poly means many, and then theos means God. And this is belief in the existence of more than one God. The gods are members of a larger family or group known as a pantheon. Okay, so if we go to, I hate using them because they're awful, but the Marvel movies. Okay, so that is a pantheon of gods: Thor, Loki, Hel, Brigid. Yes, I totally drew a blank there, but yeah. Different gods have different responsibilities and control separate things, okay? So this is when you're going to see the idea that there's a god of the moon, there's a god of death, there's a god of childbearing, things of that nature. Examples are most modern pagan traditions: Hinduism, Shintoism, Thelema, and Taoism. And then pantheism, which Gwen just mentioned, is the belief that God and the universe are coexistent and inseparable. Commonly, these folks believe that religious experience is derived from interaction with the universe. They feel that nature is the ultimate context of human existence. They see improvement in the relationship between humanity and nature as a duty, and they see the force of God as nature within a being. Puppy.
Oh, totally forgot.
So probably the biggest, example of this would be Hinduism. I know we're not lumping those folks in, but it's the idea that one is everything and everything is one. The idea that there's just as much in this rock, God in this rock, as there is in any one of us or in anything else. Okay. I know that's a giant concept to wrap your head around for folks who have not kind of went down that path. So if you have questions later, please ask me. I'll try to explain a little bit better. Okay. Now I'm going to muddy the waters even further. There's something called panentheism. All right. The definition is a combination of theism, which is God as a supreme being, and pantheism, which God is everything. Common beliefs: God is greater than the universe. The universe is contained within God. Events and changes in the universe affect and change God, and God changes the universe. So I'm going to try to put this in a nutshell. It's the idea that that pantheism exists. What I just said, there's as much magic in God in each one of us as there is in that rock. But all of that is housed within a giant God that we cannot even comprehend. And it's so big and so magnificent and so interconnected that it would be impossible for us to conceive it. Okay? Really, it's kind of a Christian philosophical movement to try to rationalize things that the Bible kind of leaves open to interpretation. All right? That's a very large conversation for another day. Does anybody have specific questions on that or would like me to try to rephrase? Okay. Next we have animism, the original Latin word for breath or soul. Anna, I think is where that comes from. And this is the idea that the spirit is universal and present in all objects, even those that are inanimate, and in addition to animals and plants. Most likely this was humanity's oldest form of spirituality practiced by our ancient ancestors. So again, sort of like pantheism and panentheism, this rock is sacred, okay? But probably only certain rocks that feel nice to you or you believe do things for you. Animals that were seen. This is where we get into the concept of sympathetic magic. So this is a concept of believing that something is animate when it probably isn't. My biggest example for this is children and their toys, right? So I remember when I was a kid, my G.I. Joes were real, right? Like you could not convince me otherwise. I thought they moved when I wasn't looking at them. I had conversations with them. That's the idea of animism, okay, is that things are animate, but we can't perceive them being animate unless you try really, really, really hard, okay?
Toy Story?
Yeah,
That's what I was just thinking.
pretty much.
Or what's her name? Eve from Life Size. You ever seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next we have anthropocentrism. Thank you. That's just, there's
Don't
way
worry, I
more.
wouldn't have been able to pronounce that either.
This is a belief that humans are central and the most significant entities in the world and are separate from and superior to other non-human elements of nature. Viewpoint commonly held by monotheistic, theistic, Abrahamic religions, right? Basically, this is mine. If I can control it, it's mine. Then here's the idea of deism. Deism is a form of monotheism in which God is not immanent. Okay, this one's kind of interesting to me. So this is the belief that God exists. There is one God and it created the universe. But God is either unwilling or unable to affect the world after he created it.
Oh.
So this is also known as the watchmaker God theory. The idea that he just wound it up and let it go. Yeah. And then henotheism. This is a worship of a single God without actively denying the existence of other gods. Okay, that kind of goes back to Christo-Paganism that we were talking about. It's the idea that there is a supreme God, but there are like other gods that you should probably pay attention to when you're in their realm. An example of this would be like the Yazidis, who are a tribe that was kind of in the Middle East, pretty much been obliterated, but they believe in the concept almost exactly like a Christian God or an Abrahamic God, but they also believed that God was not in control. They believe that something closer to the devil was. So they worship that. Because why would you worship something that's not going to help you? You worship the thing that helps you, even if the other one exists. And then again, secondarily, if you're a person who was dominated by a Christian or a Muslim invasion, as your religion went away from your childhood, you're probably going to merge into other things as well from what you're being taught now, and you're going to have a interesting internal pantheon. Okay. And then agnostic theism, origin of that word is without knowledge of God. So this is defined as a person who does not claim absolute knowledge of the existence of gods. There's weak agnostic theism, which is a belief that the belief that God is attainable. So with enough study and practice, I could figure it out. And then there's strong agnostic theism, which is a belief that nobody can figure out if there's a God or not, or gods, or anything. And then lastly, I put on here atheistic paganism. So you're not required to believe in any of these things to be a pagan. There are many, many atheistic pagans. The person who originally wrote this class, Andrea, who I believe somebody mentioned here that they took a class with Andrea, is a good example of that. This is the idea of working with like your collective unconscious or seeing source as something other than godly. All right, guys, let's see where we're at. I broke it. There we go.
You should have brought.
Yes.
All the way up to group-oriented shamanic journeying practices. It's been a while back, but we had a course here at the church on guided meditation, hypnosis, that sort of thing, self-trance work. Been a long time. A guy named Zach put that together, and it was really cool. We did a lot of like drum trance work and things of that nature. Next one will be to celebrate. Most pagans celebrate the changing of the seasons to some degree, in addition to hand fastings, which are pagan weddings, and funerals, other rites. Other rites would include things like menstruation, cronehood, and childbirth. Cronehood would be becoming an elder. So getting into, yeah. Next down the list, we have practice magic. Pagans perform many types of magic rituals on both a grand and a small scale. Communicate. Pagans build communities kind of like we're doing here. They also build them through social media and platforms to practice their traditions. Protecting the environment is big, kind of going back to the social justice thing we were just talking about. If the environment and the world and is your central practice as a pagan, then you're going to want to protect it. So many pagans are active in the green movement and politically support the protection of the earth, which is sacred to their belief system. One of the biggest things that I like to do in paganism, one of the more fun things in my opinion, is witchcrafting or crafting in general. Many pagans construct items to be used in their practice and in their spell work. Examples would include altar setups, wands, divination tools, clothing, etc. And then divination is our next one. Divination is the process of collecting information about the past and present from source through the use of items such as tarot cards, clairvoyance, trance, runes, bones, or observing natural processes in nature. So basically the idea of trying to figure out what happened before or what's going to happen next or even what's happening now through divination methods. And another thing that you're going to see pagans doing is engaging with nature. Pagans strive to connect with the outdoors through nature walks, gardening, forestry, bushcraft, camping, that sort of thing. Yeah, so like that's the idea of going out and with very little and constructing what you need from your environment. So like,
Building a fire.
yeah, or a shelter or any of that stuff.
So roughing it.
Roughing it. Yep, good. I know many pagans who own campers. Okay, so you don't have to.
They
All
don't
right.
rough it real hard.
All right, guys. Next, again, I'm going to give that trigger warning again for anybody in the room or online. I'm going to discuss, kind of walk you through a pagan funeral. And so, yeah, again, this was for a child of 1 year old. So, again, I understand that can be traumatic and hard for people. So, if you'd like to exit, I'll just give you a minute to do that. And you can see this link by going to where it said celebrate, and then funerals is underlined. That's a link. Yep. So looking at a pagan funeral, this was Ezekiel Lamont McVeigh, sorry. He was 1 year, and then there's his obituary there if you'd like to read it. I also linked to Hamilton's funeral home. There's his slideshow and things there if you'd like to see more pictures of him. Ezekiel was born with a terminal disease, and unfortunately his parents spent a great deal of his short life preparing for his death. They are both practitioners of heathenry and wish to have a heathen funeral. So kind of how this happened, I was working overnight at Hamilton's. I got the call to go to the house. And when I get a call for a child, I almost never check for a pre-plan, which is the idea that someone communicated with the funeral home beforehand to plan things, just because that's almost never the case. But I did in this case just to see, and he had a pre-plan. So I knew this was going to be not good, meaning that he'd been sick for a long time. So then I got to the house and to take him into my care, and noticed that Dad was wearing a Thor's hammer. So got to talking about that. And then, kind of asked what he would like to do, and then I would be able to facilitate helping them kind of with my connections and things through this church, actually. So both Mom and Dad definitely wanted to do that, and so we constructed things in that manner. First picture that you see here, so this is actually a little altar setup that we did. I've got all kind of, I'm going to go through the symbology of everything at the bottom, but this is our crematory. So that large metal thing in the background is actually what people are cremated inside of. It's part of Norse tradition to cremate before burial. So they definitely wanted cremation to happen prior to anything else happening. They wanted to witness cremation and place them in the unit themselves. Our crematory manager there at Hamilton's is a gal by the name of Lil Clote. She's also a pagan, and she is more of a Celtic pagan, but she was able to help me. That's actually her bowl there. That's her chalice, her bell, and then she brought in various herbs and things like that to anoint him before he was cremated. Kind of scrolling down there a little bit. That's a makeshift casket that we used. When you're dealing with children, it's difficult to size things. So that's actually a laundry hamper that we did some modifications to, placed a liner in, and used it for the cremation process. And then next down here, here's kind of a picture of the altar setup for the chapel. This took place downtown at Hamilton's on Lion Street. Members of CUUPS were involved in the planning of the execution. I was the funeral director in charge. My partner, Lissa Mum, is also a funeral director. So she helped greatly in getting everything together. Ross Griswold, a member of our group here, he was the officiant. So he did a majority of the speaking. And then Larry Dillon, another one of our members, provided the wood wall hangings there that we use for imagery on either side. And then he also made the wooden runes that were gifted to the family and available for use during service. Next picture down there, we just kind of have a close-up of the runes. There's instructions there on how to use them, and people were encouraged to come up and throw the runes during visitation and the service. The funeral service itself consisted mainly of telling of the story of Loki and Thor's voyage into the land of the giants, in which they are tricked into accepting the challenges and games which they could not win. And that we rolled into the idea of death, the idea that nobody wins in the end. And then family members also spoke in memory of Ezekiel. Symbols that we use for the family, here we use the Mjolnir, so Mjolnir, yes, which is the proper name for Thor's hammer, which is a symbol of Thor himself. The Bifrost, there's a lot of rainbow symbology there. It's the idea that when the Norse pass, they believe that they go to the afterlife on a rainbow. So, and then speaking with the family, by he I mean Ezekiel was always fascinated with colors and with rainbow things, and his dad heavily believed that he saw the Bifrost his entire life. Runes, these are used in communicating with the gods and with the dead. Huggin and Muggin, that's not the actual wood burning there, but it's just a symbol. Those are Odin's ravens, which are his constant companions. And then Sleipnir, which is Odin's 7-legged horse. Also in the cremation picture where you can't see it, unfortunately, there's an emblem for the goddess Hel. Hel is often seen ferrying people to the other world and was probably the most powerful of the Norse gods, but chose to be with the dead instead of the living. We had a big sun above everything, which is the idea of hope and the seasons. And then we had the world tree, which is basically a breakdown of where the Norse believe they go, depending on what they did. It's a very complex system, but yeah, that's what that symbol means. So that's kind of a real world example of a pagan celebration, even though it's not really a very fun celebration. More fun celebrations are the things we do here at CUUPS. So we do something for every point on the wheel of the year, generally. Kind of one of the bigger things is our celebration for May Day, traditionally known as May Day. We're going to go through all the names and stuff later. And that's down at the Labyrinth, which is down there. Our Samhain is kind of the biggest one of the year. Everyone loves Samhain. It coincides with Halloween. So people tend to get really dressed up and kind of mock the witchiness and all of that type of thing and have a lot of fun. We'll get into that in next class, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. Yeah. All right, guys. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about today, before I just do a quick rundown of what we're going to do throughout the rest of our time.
What did you say called Halloween?
Samhain.
That's not how it's spelled.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's spelled like Sam Hain.
Really?
S-A-M-H-E-I.
What's the pronunciation?
Samhain. Yeah.
Problematic when you
I'm
mostly
pronouncing
learn
that
through
wrong.
books.
All right, guys. Last thing that we're going to talk about here is, I call it the Satan issue. So we're going to spend some time talking about Satanism, what it is, and how it's different from paganism. The idea here is to, number one, inform people of what it is actually. Reason being is, for a lot of you new folks, let's go back to our elders. How many times have you folks been misconstrued as a Satanist?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's important, especially when you're getting into the game, to be able to kind of defend yourself against those accusations, or to realize you are a Satanist and become one. Okay. So either one. All right. So strange bedfellows. Pagans and Satanists are often lumped together by the media in closed-minded religious groups. Pagans, by and large, do not worship Satan. Okay. I said by and large because there is a small sect associated with Christo-paganism called Luciferians that actually do worship a ideal of Lucifer. So that is a thing, but that is a very, very small thing. And this one always trips people up. Satanists, by and large, do not worship Satan. Okay, they really don't. Like pagans, Satanists also have subgroups and divisions. Okay, it's beneficial for both groups to understand one another instead of demonizing one another, which is often the case. Both pagans and Satanists fell victim to the satanic panic, which occurred in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and both are often targets of far-right Abrahamic propaganda. It's difficult to worship something that you don't believe in. Almost all pagan pantheons are older than Christianity. Almost all pagans seek to follow paths considered good and positive, neither of which are characteristic of the Christian devil. Both the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple, the world's two largest satanic religions, dismiss the idea that a being called Satan actually exists. Individuals who believe in Satan as an actual being are referred to as Luciferians, which I just mentioned, or devil worshippers, which are generally mentally ill people who do things in the devil's name without really understanding anything behind it. Both Satanists and pagans agree that criminal actions undertaken by devil worshippers are vile and are not condoned by either religion. Yes.
The devil tarot card.
Yeah, I can talk about that kind of after we finish up, but yeah.
Okay, I just.
Yeah, that's a very fun conversation. Right? All right, now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about left versus right-hand path. Okay, so there are pagans who practice darker forms of magic. All right, we're going to have an entire class on magic, how it works, what it is, that sort of thing. But I want to suffice to say a couple of things here. So when we're looking at the right-hand path, this is magic practiced by people who believe themselves to be on the side of good. They only practice white magic, which is magic that is only used to benefit others. They follow restrictive creeds such as the Wiccan Rede or the Threefold Law, which are dogma, I would say, telling you how to do magic correctly and warning against what will happen if you do it incorrectly. And they have developed an image that makes them non-threatening to society. All right, I'll give you examples of what I mean there. So the Wiccan Rede, I'm going to shorten it. It's actually very long, but it's the idea of practice all the magic you want, but don't hurt anything. Okay, so baneful magic, which is the idea of like cursing and things like that, are not generally accepted in the white light or right hand path. The furthest that they will go is to bind someone, to stop someone from doing something harmful. All right. Big example of this, during World War II, a bunch of Wiccans got together and attempted to stop the German planes from crossing over into England, and actually, through most accounts, had some success in doing so. So that would be the idea of binding instead of cursing. Going over to the other side, we have the left-hand path. Satanists almost exclusively practice left-hand path stuff, okay? That's not to say that all Satanists are bad or that they don't do magic to help people, but they don't have any limitations on hurting people either. They have little interest in the concepts of good versus evil. They practice all forms of magic, sometimes for self-gain. They have few limitations on their use of magic, so long as no animals or children are harmed, and everyone involved in the ritual is a consenting adult. They defend their viewpoints rationally, but retain the imagery of socially unacceptable. Okay? So now what I like to do is a compare and contrast between the Satanic Temple and the Church of Satan. These are the two biggest satanic organizations operating.
What were they again?
The Church of Satan, which is older, and then the Satanic Temple, which is a newer thing. So the Church of Satan, this was constructed by Anton Zander LaVey in 1966 in California. LaVey wrote the Satanic Bible, which sets out the essentials for satanic beliefs. Satan is viewed as an archetype representing a variety of specific energies. These energies interest the members of the Church of Satan, but not Satan himself or itself. They do not worship any deity, since one of their guiding principles is autonomy and self-determination. So in essence, they worship themselves. Going over to the Satanic Temple, this was co-founded in 2013 by Lucian Greaves and Malcolm Jerry. It sought to fix what was considered wrong with LaVey's church, the Church of Satan. It succeeded in having many media stunts, including a pink mass, which was a symbolic ritual to turn Fred Phelps's mother gay in the afterlife by having queer people perform sexual acts on her grave.
Why? Just why?
They have constructed a Baphomet statue, which is I don't know how tall it is, a really big statue that they attempt to erect next to the Ten Commandment monuments on public ground. The idea is that because of religious plurality, you either have to erect them both or take them both down. What else have they done? Let's see. They promote after-school Satan clubs with the idea that if you're allowing Christian clubs to have use of the school, you have to allow Satanists to do so as well. And recently, they do have a headquarters in Salem, and it was set on fire by a religious extremist. So they used that to, no one's heard, it was kind of a small fire, but they used it very wisely to get into the media. They do not have their own literature, but rather rely on classical works they find important, and they are politically motivated. They use poison pill tactics, which are tactics to influence a separation of church and state via what I just mentioned. Next thing here, we're not going to watch these obviously, but this is sort of homework. In 2019, both the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple put out documentaries. I call them dueling documentaries here. An American Satan is actually free on Tubi right now, if you want to watch it. And then Hail Satan is, I think you got to pay for it, but it's available like on YouTube and all of those different things. And by watching those, you'll get a very good feel for the difference in the ideologies.
Is one left hand and the other's right hand?
No. So the Satanic Temple doesn't really practice magic at all. They have rituals, but in truth, they are more of a political stunt group than they are a religion. They do their best to satisfy religious requirements so they can protect their congregation, if you want to call them that, from the government on certain things like abortion rights issues, things of that nature. But no, LaVeyans do practice magic, and they are, again, there's really no rules. As long as no children or animals are harmed and everyone in the ritual is consenting, then there's no rules after that. Just going to go over this little chart real quick. It's a kind of comparison of the two groups. So the Satanic Temple was formed in 2013, and the Church of Satan is older, formed in 1966. I will say this was put out by the Satanic Temple, so it's biased. So I'm going to correct its bias on a few things. Officially recognized as a tax-exempt church by the IRS. So the new one, the Satanic Temple is, the old one is not. What they don't tell you is that that's by design. So LaVey was a big proponent of taxing all churches to the hilt. So he believed that every church should pay its taxes and wanted to lead by example. So that's why that is. They're making it look like that he couldn't get it or something of that nature. They deny it all of the time. So, yeah. Taken seriously by credible religious scholars as mainstream modern Satanism. Both are. Belief in an actual Satan. Neither one of them. Belief in magic. The Satanic Temple, as we just discussed, does not believe in magic. The Church of Satan does. Foundational texts. Vast literary canon is what the Satanic Temple says that they have for themselves. So they just reference like Milton and things that exist outside of biblical canon, but they have like a reading list, but they don't have any books dedicated to their practice. The Church of Satan has 10, I think, the Satanic Bible being the primary one. Political views. So the Satanic Temple is a non-theistic movement aligned with liberty, equality, and rationalism. And then they say that Anton LaVey's is just Ayn Rand with ritual. And LaVey was quoted as saying that. However, it was kind of very much taken out of context. The Church of Satan considers itself apolitical. So it's not allowed to ask any of their members about their politics. The idea is that if you're a Satanist, you don't have to be a good guy. So if I'm a business owner, you're supposed to vote Republican because that's better for you. If you're a person who is not a business owner, you're supposed to vote Democrat because that's better for you. I know that's a huge by and large statement, but their idea is that each person is going to do what's better for themselves, and they're not required to worry about anyone else. So politics should follow your will, not the will of the church. Fights for secularism. Again, the Church of Satan is not political, so they do not engage in anything political. Defends reproductive rights, same thing. Has a physical headquarters. This one's a lie. So I talked about Salem having the satanic temples. However, the physical black houses do exist. First one in California, and there is the House of the High Priest, which serves as a meeting place, and that's the Black House, which is currently in Poughkeepsie, New York. Has local chapters. The newer one, the Satanic Temple, does. LaVeyans do not. They used to, but they found it problematic just because they couldn't control them appropriately. And then actively growing, that's a lie. I'd say they both are. The Satanic Temple says that it holds regular meetings. The Church of Satan does not. That's a lie also. The Church of Satans are invitation only, so they don't publicly announce them, but they meet up and then they will publicize them after the fact, but they don't. In the news, talking about Satanism, they both kind of are, but recently it's only been the Satanic Temple. In the news for their activities, that is clearly the Satanic Temple. Socially and politically active. We've already been over that. Accepts donations. They both do. It costs $250 to even join the Church of Satan. It does not cost anything to join the Satanic Temple. We discussed the Baphomet Monument and after-school clubs. And authoritarian. The Church of Satan is structured. It has a priesthood. The other one does not. And then the last two are just kind of silly, so I'm not even really going to go into them. But yeah, that was a quote. Anton LaVey had a strange fetish for smells, and he was writing about that and started talking about other people who might enjoy smells of it. Yeah, it's really weird. But anyway, and then topic of a major documentary. Again, that's false because I just showed you that each one has one. Guys, I'm going to give a quick synopsis of cults, just as a sort of don't do that type of thing, and that'll be the last thing we do. So cults generally have an enigmatic leader, okay? Cults try to control you. Cults try to love bomb you. They'll try to separate you from your society in one way or another and then make you believe that they are the only good thing. There are cults that exist within paganism. The before mentioned ethnocentric ones are what I would point to. There's also some that are more left-leaning. Anybody ever heard of Teal Swan? Okay, Teal Swan's kind of a YouTube person who blew up in the last, I'd say 5-6 years, and she now has a current ranch where people go and give them all of her money, or give her all of them their money. How do you say that? Be careful, just be smart. Satanism doesn't really have cults. I mean, you're really going to fall into one of those two categories, or you're going to kind of be a person who is, goes out on their own without any real particular religion. All right, guys. I'm going to go ahead and kind of close it down there and open it up for discussion, comments, anything of that nature.
Okay, how can we get on this at home?
So if you save it onto if you have the link,
Is there
we
a
can get
link?
you a link. Yeah.
Okay.
I printed off the QR codes and then forgot them, so that's awesome. I currently have, you can kind of see what I call like the syllabus, what we're going to do on each day. This was 4 classes total every week, except for the 19th of October, because we had to do some shuffling. Yep. So that's what we'll do. Today, I know this, if you found it interesting, awesome, but this is the most boring day. Okay. So, and then also going forward, I will say indoctrination is not a thing. We don't care if you're a pagan or not, but going forward, this is kind of it's like, oh, okay, if I've learned enough information, but I don't really want to be involved, I would suggest exiting now, because we're going to get into more kind of heavier topics and then start doing some things. So homework for next time, which is next week on Thursday. If you would like to come back, and it doesn't matter if you're currently practicing or not, I want you to bring back a magical item. So this could be something, if you have an altar, from your altar. This could be, if you don't have an altar, it's even more fun then, because you get to define why it's magical. Okay? If you have things that are secret, do not bring those. Okay? All right. Shouldn't have to say that. Okay. Other questions, anything, comments? We've got the room, so I'm good to talk. Whatever you guys want.
Just realized it was
Am
happy
I losing
birthday.
my mind? Just requires me.
They're saying happy birthday to one of their members.
Oh,
They always do
okay.
that.
How about online? Do we have anything online?
Okay, what's the link for this?
We'll have to do you have an email?
Yeah.
We'll get it to your email.
Okay.
It's also in the newsletter if you're subscribed.
I don't think I'm subscribed.
Will every class be sent out in a newsletter like it was today?
It's also on Facebook and on
Yeah, that's where I saw it.
I couldn't find the next few events on Facebook, which is fine. The newsletter was very helpful. Thank you.
Janae is saying in chat that she will post it in the Facebook event for everybody.
Sweet.
Okay.
Thank you.
And she is going to send a reminder, she says. Any y'all out there internet land want to talk?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So it looks like our last class is after Samhain. So
Yes.
like, is that something that, is that like an example of an activity that we would do or something related to that?
Certainly.
Or I'm guessing the group would be doing. The
Yes.
CUUPS group would be doing.
The group
something
will.
of some kind.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly, it is a public event. Stop me if I'm wrong. Children are not allowed to come to it, correct?
We are asking that people be 16 or older.
16 or older.
Because it is-
Okay.
Samhain is a much more serious. That being said, if you are a parent in this room and you believe that your child can handle it, we're not going to stop you.
We're also looking for childcare for younger children.
And I would say if you come to the classes,
Good idea.
by that point, you'll kind of know if it's something you'll want to do or not. Because we're going to go way further in depth and things, kind of talk a little bit about ritual format and what you'll see, that sort of thing. So.
And I recommend waiting because the festivals and the observances have their own specific kind of focuses on them. And Samhain is probably the most somber of them because it's generally kind of like
Very serious.
yes.
What'd you say?
It's
In
very
a
serious.
nutshell, you're
Very
honoring the dead and the ancestors because we're heading into the dark time of the year. So that's the reason why Samhain's considered one of the more somber, darker holidays.
If anybody wants to get information for their email, if you write down your email on next to your name, we can also go ahead and email you information about what's going on with this particular group and anything else. Just pass that around for me.
We'd love to have you.
Yeah, definitely.
Anything else, anything you found interesting or have questions about or want me to elaborate on?
I just have a quick question. You got the Satan videos. Is there a pagan video you would recommend?
There's a bunch, and my problem with that is there's so many, I have a problem limiting it. And that really depends on what you are kind of looking for. I would suggest if you're just kind of wanting general stuff, sort of, and I almost hate to say this, but go the Wiccan route just because it's sort of a beginner route into things, if that makes sense. Would you guys suggest that as well, or am I out of place there?
I definitely need to figure out.
Okay, all right.
I mean, it depends a lot on where they come from.
Yes.
The Wiccan route is the most well-known and has the most documentation. And it is the oldest of the neo-pagan traditions. But there are also a lot of people, it's just important to choose your sources, because sometimes people that you find online can be really off base.
So,
I'm just really proud I fit it in there.
I think that's a long.
Can you offer
address
anything
I've
to
ever
consider for bringing an item next week? Like, you know, I grew up Roman Catholic, I've been Lutheran, I've been Methodist, like,
Oh,
bring a magic item,
okay.
like, I don't even know what to consider.
Well, if you wanted to consider something kind of easy off the top of my head, bring a crucifix. Okay, and then we can kind of go through the symbology of that and why it's a magical item. Other suggestions would just be anything that you're attached to and you don't know why. That would be a good thing. Also, anything that appears to you, seems to appear to you right before you need it, randomly. So a thing you see on the ground, a thing you see in a store, that sort of thing. So yeah, be open as you can. There's no wrong answer.
Can't
Okay.
bring my whole garden.
Can't bring your whole, but you can bring.
You can bring a plant.
Take
Yeah.
some nice pictures.
Okay,
That's the recording.
All right. Thanks, everyone.